I can see dead people, and it ruined my life. I was 6 years old when I saw my first ghost. It was a woman standing at the foot of my bed. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, and her body shivered like the flicker of a candle flame. She wore a dress that might have been beautiful once, but it was soaked through, clinging to her skin like she just climbed out of a river. At first, I thought it was a dream. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just stood there, staring at me with eyes that seemed too wide, too dark. I screamed. My mom came rushing in, flipping on the light and pulling me into her arms. "It's just a nightmare," she said, stroking my hair. "There's nothing there." But when I looked over her shoulder, the woman was still there. That's when I realized the truth. I could see them, the dead. By the time I was 12, I'd learned to ignore them, or at least I tried to. They were everywhere, sitting silently on park benches, standing in dark corners, wandering through crowds like lost shadows. Some of them looked normal, almost alive, if not for the slight blur around their edges. Others didn't. I'll never forget the man on the subway with his head twisted completely around, staring at me with a crooked smile. Or the little boy with burns across his face, who sat at the foot of my bed every night for a week, crying softly into his hands. "Why won't you talk to me?" he'd asked once, his voice hoarse and broken. I didn't answer. I never did. Talking to them only made it worse. By adulthood, the ghost had become a constant presence in my life, like background noise I couldn't turn off. I tried to live normally, got a job, made friends, even dated a little. But the dead had a way of creeping in, ruining everything. I couldn't take my girlfriend Rachel to the movies without a ghost sitting between us, whispering nonsense into my ear. I couldn't go grocery shopping without passing the old man in aisle 3 who stared at me with empty sockets where his eyes should have been. Rachel didn't understand why I was so distant. She thought I was distracted, uninterested. When she left, I didn't blame her. How could I explain that I wasn't ignoring her? I was ignoring them. It was a quiet night when things changed. I was sitting in my apartment, nursing a non-alcoholic beer, when I felt it. The prickling sensation on the back of my neck that meant I wasn't alone. I sighed, setting the bottle down. "What do you want?" I asked, not even bothering to look up. "You can see me," a voice said, soft and tentative. I turned. It was a girl, maybe 15 or 16, with long dark hair and a blood-stained hoodie. Her eyes were wide and scared, her hands clutching the fabric of her hoodie like she was trying to hold herself together. "Please," she whispered, "I need your help." I clenched my jaw, shaking my head. "I don't do that." Tears filled her eyes. "He's still out there. He's going to hurt someone else. You have to stop him." Her words sent a chill down my spine. Ghosts didn't usually ask for things like this. Most of them wanted closure, peace, someone to hear their story. But this girl, she wanted justice. "Who's going to hurt someone?" I asked before I could stop myself. Her lips trembled as she answered, "The man who killed me." I spent the next day digging through old news reports, searching for any mention of a teenage girl who had been murdered. It didn't take long to find her. Her name was Emily Marks. She'd been missing for 6 months before her body was discovered in a wooded area just outside of town. The police had ruled it a homicide, but had no leads. Emily appeared that night, standing in the same spot where I'd first seen her. She was still wearing the blood-stained hoodie, her hands trembling at her sides. "I found you," I said softly, holding up a printout of the article. "Emily Marks, is that you?" She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "He's still out there," she whispered. "You have to stop him before he does it again." It wasn't long before I realized I wasn't just dealing with Emily's killer. As I followed the trail of evidence, old crime scenes, abandoned houses, and dark alleys, I began to feel something else watching me, something bigger than Emily. It started small, a shadow flickering in the corner of my vision, a faint whisper that didn't belong to her. But as the days passed, the presence grew stronger. One night I woke up to find a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It wasn't Emily. This thing was tall and gaunt, its face hidden beneath a dark hood. Its body seemed to ripple, like smoke caught in a windless room. "You shouldn't have interfered," it said, its voice a low, guttural growl. I scrambled back against the headboard, my chest tightening with fear. "What are you?" I demanded. It tilted its head, the faint glow of 2 eyes burning beneath the hood. "She's not the only one tied to you. You've been seeing us your whole life, haven't you? But you never asked why." My blood ran cold. Emily appeared again the next night, but this time she wasn't alone. The hooded figure stood behind her, its skeletal hand resting on her shoulder. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Help me," she whispered. The figure stepped forward, its presence filling the room like a storm. "She's mine," it said. They all are, and so are you. No, I said, standing my ground. Not anymore. The air grew heavy, the shadows in the room twisting and writhing like living things. The entity lunged at me, its hand reaching for my throat, but I held my ground. You feed on fear, I said, my voice shaking but resolute. But I'm not afraid of you anymore. The figure froze, its body flickering like a dying flame. Emily stepped forward, her eyes wide with hope. Go, I said to her. You're free now. The hooded figure let out a piercing scream, its form dissolving into ash. Emily smiled, just once, before fading into the light. The next morning, I woke up expecting the world to feel lighter, like a burden had been lifted. But it wasn't. The whispers were still there, faint but persistent, like a distant radio stuck on the wrong frequency. Shadows flickered in the corners of my vision, just out of reach. I couldn't see Emily anymore, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That's when I noticed it. My reflection in the mirror didn't look quite right. It was subtle at first, a slight delay when I moved, a flicker in the corner of its smile. I stared at it for what felt like hours, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. But when I turned to leave, it didn't. The days that followed were a nightmare. The hooded figure might have been gone, but the other ghosts hadn't left. In fact, they seemed worse, more solid, more present. They didn't just stand silently in the background anymore. They moved closer, their faces twisted with anger and desperation. You shouldn't have done that, one of them hissed, their voice crackling like static. Another leaned in close as I passed, its breath cold against my ear. You broke the balance, it whispered. I tried to block them out, to pretend they weren't there, but it was impossible. They were in my apartment, on the street, in my dreams. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, their hollow faces staring back at me. And always, in the background, I could feel it. The faint echo of the hooded figure, like a shadow burned into the edges of my mind. It wasn't until I found the old notebook that I started to understand. I was cleaning out my closet, trying to distract myself from the ghosts, when I stumbled across a dusty box labeled Keepsakes. Inside, beneath old photos and birthday cards, was a small leather-bound journal I didn't remember owning. I opened it, my heart sinking, as I read the first page. For the gift of sight, a debt must be paid. The entries were written in my own handwriting, though I had no memory of writing them. They detailed strange rituals, whispered promises, and the moment I first saw the hooded figure. I'd made a deal. Somewhere, years ago, I'd asked for this gift to see the dead, and in return, I'd promised something I couldn't remember. But the journal made one thing clear. The hooded figure wasn't gone. It was waiting. The next night, I woke to find Emily standing at the foot of my bed. At first, I thought it was just another nightmare. But as she stepped closer, her face twisted into something cruel, something sharp and inhuman. You didn't free me, she said, her voice cold and mocking. You freed him. I scrambled back, my chest tightening. What are you talking about? Her smile widened, revealing teeth that were too long, too jagged. You broke the cycle, she said, but the balance wasn't yours to break. Now he's free to take what he's owed. No, I whispered, shaking my head. I stopped him. He's gone. Her laughter was hollow, echoing through the room. He's not gone. He's inside you. The air around me grew heavy, the shadows deepening until they swallowed the room entirely. I felt it then, a cold, dark presence stirring inside me, coiled like a snake waiting to strike. For days, I felt it growing stronger. The hooded figure wasn't outside anymore. It wasn't a shadow in the corner of the room or a voice whispering from the dark. It was inside me. It spoke in my thoughts, its voice low and insistent. You let me in. You belong to me now. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw it there, hiding behind my eyes, waiting for the moment I'd finally give in. And the worst part, I could feel myself slipping. The line between me and it was blurring. Sometimes I'd wake up in places I didn't remember going, with no memory of how I got there. People looked at me differently, their eyes filled with fear or suspicion. I was losing myself. I couldn't keep living like this. I had to end it, whatever it was, before it consumed me entirely. The journal mentioned a ritual, something that could sever the connection between me and the hooded figure. It required a mirror, a circle of salt, and a single, undeniable truth spoken aloud. I set it up in my apartment, my hands trembling as I lit the candles. The ghosts watched from the edges of the room, their hollow eyes fixed on me. They didn't speak, but their presence felt heavier than ever, like they were waiting for something. I stood in front of the mirror, the salt circle at my feet. My reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't just my reflection. The hooded figure was there too, its face flickering beneath the surface like a hidden flame. You can't get rid of me, it said, its voice a low growl. I took a deep breath, my fists clenching at my sides. "You're not me," I said. "You never were." The figure laughed, the sound vibrating through the room. "You invited me in. You wanted this. I'm the only reason you can see them. Without me, you're nothing." I stepped closer to the mirror, my voice steady. "I don't care about seeing them anymore. I don't care about you. You don't own me. You never did." The figure's laughter faltered, its form flickering. "I know who I am," I said, louder this time, "and you're not part of me." The mirror cracked, a web of fractures spreading across its surface. The air in the room shifted, the heavy presence lifting as the figure let out a piercing scream, and then it was gone. The next morning, the world felt different. The whispers were gone. The shadows didn't flicker anymore. For the first time in years, I couldn't see the dead. I stood in front of the broken mirror, staring at my reflection. It was just me now, tired, worn, but whole. The ghosts were gone, but their memory lingered. I knew they were still out there, somewhere, waiting for someone else who could see them. As I stepped outside, the sunlight warm on my face, I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore, and for the first time, I felt free. Well, that was pretty much it. I hope you liked the story till then. Bye-bye.